terror attacks, migration crises and war, oceans polluted by plastic, catastrophic changes to the climate, gender inequality and social injustice. It's easy to focus on what's wrong with the world. But are things really so bad? Actually, for most people, there's never been a better time to be alive than right now. That's not to say there aren't instances of individual suffering for refugees in Burma or Syria, or indeed for plenty of people from London to Los Angeles. But for most of us, in most places on the planet, life is better today than ever before. There are about 7.5 billion people alive right now, double the number that there were 50 years ago. Having more people around hasn't made us worse off, quite the opposite. A baby born this year will have a better life chance than one born in any previous year ever. Back in the mid-1960s, for example, out of every 1,000 babies born around the world, 113 wouldn't make it to their first birthday. Today, that number's down to 32 and falling fast. In 1960, average life expectancy worldwide was 52. Today, it's 71. When I was growing up in Uganda in the 1980s, life expectancy for someone there was 40-something and falling. Today, it's 60-something and rising so fast, it's soon going to draw level with that in Europe and America. Big killer diseases are being defeated too. Deaths from malaria and HIV are down dramatically. Stroke deaths in the United States have halved since 1990. In South Korea, they've fallen by 2/3. In the UK in 1965, almost 8,000 people were killed on the roads. This year, that figure will be down to about 2,000, despite there being many times more cars on our roads. We're better off now than ever before. In Britain today, people are twice as rich as their grandparents, and a third better off than even 30 years ago. A rise in incomes has been even more dramatic and pronounced in countries like Spain and Italy, where incomes have risen fourfold since the early 60s. Of course, there are still some pockets of terrible deprivation, even in rich countries. But poor people today have a higher standard of living than rich people did in the past. Among those officially classified as poor in America, 99% live in homes that have electricity, water and a fridge. 95% have a television. 88% have a phone. 71% own a car. Over 50% have air conditioning. A generation ago, air travel was so expensive, rich people that flew a lot were called the jet set. Today, the cost of air tickets is so affordable, anyone who wants to can afford to join the jet set. In the 1970s, international phone calls were so expensive, families would only speak to loved ones across continents on very special occasions. Today, you can catch up with pretty much anyone, anywhere, for almost nothing. Sure, I hear you say, people in Europe and American countries, they might be fine. But what about people elsewhere? Actually, things have improved in Africa and Asia even faster. Ethiopia suffered a terrible famine in the early 80s. Today, Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, with a 6-fold increase in per capita output since the year 2000. In 1950, the average person living in China was not simply poor. Output per person in 1950s China was back to where it had been almost 2,000 years before. As late as 1981, almost 9 in 10 Chinese were living in extreme poverty. Now it's fewer than 1 in 10. In the early 1980s, 1 in 3 Chinese was illiterate. Today, adult literacy in China is as close as it's possible to get to 100%. China is now home to more billionaires than America, and she's starting to lead the world in terms of technology and medical innovation. As Asia, Africa and others catch up, global inequality is falling. Oh, and there's another thing. Did I mention that the world has become cleaner and greener too? There were 99% fewer oil spills last year than in 1970. A moving car in 2019 emits less pollution than a stationary car did in 1970. China's taken the giant panda off the endangered list. British rivers and waterways are cleaner now than they've been for 200 years. After becoming extinct in England Over 2,000 years ago, beavers have been reintroduced to our rivers and are thriving. Globally, CFC emissions have been cut dramatically, so much so that the hole in the ozone is now beginning to disappear. 30 years ago, the US produced 20 million tonnes of sulfur dioxide a year. They emitted 34 million tonnes of particulates. Today, sulfur dioxide emissions are down to 4 million tonnes a year, and the amount of particulates has fallen by over a third. Satellite photos show the amount of green vegetation cover around the Earth is up by 14% in the past 30 years. This process, known as global greening, is the equivalent of adding a new continent twice the size of mainland USA over the course of a lifetime. The world isn't just getting greener. It's getting greener precisely because we're more prosperous. We can afford to protect the environment and set aside areas for conservation. Those parts of the planet that are more prosperous are the places where the biggest effort has been made to reduce pollution and protect the natural world around us. Cheer up, the world really is getting better.